All right, here's some high quality prairie plants that are forbs and that tend to be perennial, are not quite as weedy as the other species I profile in a separate video. The first one's wild white indigo, and you can find this one in dry prairies. It's got some pretty cool characteristics. This is in the legume family. It's related to beans and peas, and it's got sort of a hard to get into flower, which keeps most of the pollinators out, but allows some species, large bees, to get in there, and that helps the wild white indigo spread pollen to other plants of the same type, which is what it's trying to do. A cool aspect of wild white indigo is the beautiful flowers. Those are found in midsummer in the prairie. It's a pretty big, sort of bushy plant with sort of tough grayish-green leaves. Over time, the flowers turn into green seed pods, and then when those mature, they dry out and turn black. And if you were to shake this stalk, you'd get a pretty cool rattling sound. So it makes a really interesting noise. That's the wild white indigo, and it's a pretty distinctive prairie plant. The next species is the Rattlesnake Master, and this one has these sort of white ball-shaped flowers, and it's a really kind of iconic prairie plant that is found in high-quality prairie environments and prairie restorations. The leaves are sort of strap-like and have these little teeth that are almost like hairs coming off the side. So you can recognize Rattlesnake Master by the leaves with the hairs or teeth, the ball-shaped flowers, and then later in the season, like September, October, those flowers will turn into seed heads and turn brown. So that's the Rattlesnake Master, and a very cool native prairie plant. Next species I wanted to talk about also has white flowers and has reference to snakes in the name. It's the White Snakeroot. We've seen this along trails and in the woods. It's not strictly a prairie plant. You often find it in woodlands. Some things to look for are the clusters of white flowers. There are other species with similar flowers, but not many that are blooming this late in the season. It's a very common late fall flowering plant along trails and in woods. The name White Snakeroot comes from the fact that Indians thought that snake bite remedy existed in the root, like they dug up the roots and turned it into an herbal medicine. And it's important to know that almost all native plants had uses like this. A lot of times it was probably a coincidence. Someone would have a snake bite, fear for their life, have pain and swelling, use a remedy like this, and that person happened to get better, and a belief was then spread down from one generation to the next. Typically, there's some germ of truth in these ideas, but there's also a lot of hazards and risks involved with using preparations from wild plants. Everyone's a little different. You can get complex mixes of chemicals that you weren't expecting, and so it's not usually a good idea to experiment with plants for medicinal use. Just as a side note, that's why the Rattlesnake Master got its name too, because people used parts of that plant as a snake bite remedy in the past. One of the cool things about learning plants is that you start to learn about their associations. And so here's a leaf miner, which is an insect that is specialized to the white snakeroot. And basically what happens is an insect will lay its egg. Let me find a better picture. Here's a good one. An insect will lay its egg on the leaf, say right there. And then the larva of that insect will tunnel into the leaf and start working its way, eating as it goes, creating a mine or a tunnel. And as that larva grows, the tunnel gets bigger and bigger. Here, it seems like the creature took a turn, then maybe turned around and came back. But at some point, it will exit the leaf through a hole, and that will be usually a very tiny moth that will emerge and complete the life cycle by laying its egg on another leaf. Another very cool species that belongs more in the prairie is the Prairie Dock. And the main characteristics that distinguish it are the tough, upright leaves. They're pretty big. You can see somebody's hand for scale here. That's a pretty good sized leaf. They're very tough and sandpapery, and they tend to be upright like that. And then the other characteristic are tall flowering stalks with a flower that looks a bit like a sunflower on it. And then later in the year, these flower heads will wither and you'll have seed heads there. So the Prairie Dock is a long-lived perennial plant that's indicator of a good prairie. Very closely related species is the compass plant, and you can see it has pretty similar flowers, also on a tall flower spike. Those can be as much as 12 feet tall, and what you can't see is that the roots go just as deep into the soil underneath the prairie. So this is a very long-lived, tough, perennial plant. By some estimates, it can live to be over 100 years old, one of these plants. The compass plant gets its name because the leaves are upright like the Prairie Dock's leaves, and they tend to orient, at least that's the idea, they tend to orient north-south so that the sun will, as it goes from east to west, will provide them with the most energy. So they kind of turn their leaves sort of like what a solar panel will do to make the best use of the sun. These are pretty big plants and pretty distinctive. There's not much else that looks anything like a compass plant. Another native perennial plant that's common in our prairies in this area is the purple coneflower. And it's a source of herbal medicine. You can get this in any grocery store or whatever. A lot of the claimed effects of purple coneflower are probably not very well evidenced. There's been studies that suggest that it doesn't really work the way that some people claim it does. But it certainly is beautiful, and it grows very easily in yards and in parks. And so you see this one all over town, even in flower beds in the city. It's very attractive to bees and other pollinators. And there's one other species that looks similar to it. It's the pale purple coneflower, but for all intents and purposes, you can just think of these as coneflowers. They're important for pollinators, and they also make really good bird food. These flower heads wither away, and then in the fall and late summer you have seed heads, and goldfinches and other birds like to collect those seeds, and it's a great way to attract birds if you don't want to put out bird feeder. Just plant some coneflowers. Last species, also purple, is the wild bergamot, and it's named for the spice that is found in Earl Grey tea, but it's actually a very different type of plant. That spice was a European spice that was actually made from a citrus rind, like an orange peel. But this is a native North American plant that just happens to smell similar. So if you crush the leaves, you get a really beautiful smell. The flowers are very attractive to bees, and so sometimes this is called bee balm. Typically, you'll see clusters of these flowers, and you'll see them growing sometimes in extreme abundance. They flower in midsummer. This time of year, you won't be able to see flowers anymore, but you will find these sorts of seed heads that look like nice round brown balls at the tops of the plant. If you have any doubt, pick a leaf and smell it. It should have a pretty distinctive smell if it's wild bergamot. So that's a quick tour of some of the nicer prairie plants that we have in our area. It's by no means an exhaustive list, but I hope it piques your interest a little bit and makes it easier for you to recognize things and enjoy your walks in prairies and old fields in our neck of the woods.